is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Welcome into That Football Show here on KC Sports. Our friends at Holiday Distillery spent a whole lot of time out there, Matt. Talking Franklin with Matt Verderame for That Football Show. Giving you everything you need to know going around on the NFL. Obviously, the NFL draft happening. There were some good choices made by some teams. There were also some really bad choices made by those teams. Don't worry, we won't let those go unpunished, Matt. How are you doing? How was your draft week?
My draft week was long. It was very long.
Yeah.
Listen, I enjoyed it. I love the draft. I will say this, though. There is no harder day to cover the NFL than the third day of the NFL draft.
Yes.
That is the season. I know you were doing cartwheels with hard seltzers. Good for you.
Uh-huh.
That couldn't have been pleasant. I was not doing that. I was sitting on the couch right behind me in my office watching the draft for whatever the hell it was, 8 hours, 9 hours, and just doing draft grades in real time. And I got to tell you, man, when you get to pick 215, you just I could have become a teacher. I could have went into law enforcement, could have done a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
That breaks your will to live. But we made it. And now we get to make fun of some of these teams that made hilarious picks. And we, of course, also get to talk about the Chiefs. That's cool.
Absolutely. I think the Chiefs had a pretty good draft. All things considered, I think they did a really good job, made a couple trades with some rivals, interesting enough. We thought that was going to be a problem, but they traded with people who they're actively trying to beat and compete against. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. But yeah, those 3 days, Matt, seemed like a month. Just everything that happens. And look, we're going to have content for a good week and a half, and then people will be like, okay, we don't care anymore about the draft picks. We'll figure it out. But 7 new players added to the Chiefs. What was your favorite pick for the Chiefs? I know the Xavier Worthy one is obviously really attention getting. It seems like a good fit. He seems to be really excited to be in Kansas City. But what was your favorite pick?
In terms of the value, I think Jaden Hicks was a phenomenal pick. There were people who thought he was going to go in the second round, middle second round. So to get him late fourth, I think that was one of those picks the Chiefs were sitting there and they're like, look, man, I don't know that we need a safety, but we can't pass on this kid.
Right.
We got to take him. And with Steve Spagnuolo, you figure out they'll figure out a way. They'll figure out some way to utilize him and get him in there, and he can play all over the secondary, so that helps. Go ahead and play an inbox linebacker role too. So yeah, I think you've got that, and you've got Sua Mataia, who look at and go. Some people thought he was going to be late first, early second pick.
Yeah,
and fell to him. At 63, Chiefs moved up one spot. But yeah, I would say Hicks is probably the best value. My favorite pick is probably Sua Mataia, just because of value and need kind of meeting. But look, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't the most excited about Worthy. That's the pick. If that pick works out, that's going to be incredible to watch. So, there is that factor as well.
I thought Worthy said something really interesting in his introductory press conference where he was like, I'm not worried anymore because I know that Andy Reid's knows how to use me. And I was like, that's a great point. Andy Reid knows how to use that type of receiver. He was on Kay Adams' show a week before the draft saying he models his game after Deshaun Jackson. It's you went to the perfect guy to use you if you want to model your game after Deshaun Jackson. The Worthy pick is really exciting. I think that going into the draft, there were a lot of guys at 32 that I would have been okay with. I don't think there was a ton of guys at 32, if the Chiefs would have stayed at 32 and picked, that I would have been really too disappointed with. Honestly, if the Chiefs would have picked Kingsley at 32, I don't think I would have really been that disappointed.
Yeah.
But they walk away with 2 guys that we talked about. I know on the network specifically, we've talked about being picked at number 32. They walked away with 2 guys that we had talked about being first rounders. That the Kingsley one is really impressive with just their ability to get him in the second round. Look, the tackles flew off the board early in this one. I think that the Chiefs, there was some buzz leading up into night one where the Chiefs were looking to trade up and they were looking to trade up for a tackle. There was some hot buzz around that. That just didn't materialize. They didn't really. I don't know if they found anybody. I don't know if they had the guy there. I think Amari Spams goes to the Bengals is where he ends up going. And I think Amarius Mims was one of the guys who was mocked to the Chiefs in a trade up. So that's it. They keep drafting tackles, by the way, like the same like type of tackle the Bengals do, which is
they have to because none of them can play.
Exactly. I think that is really interesting. The Bengals had a pretty decent draft. But yeah, they walked away with two guys that we had talked about as first rounders. I believe even in Nate Taylor's mock draft that he had them trading up for Kingsley at one point. Like that's the thing is that media consensus thought Kingsley Suamataia was a first round pick, and they get him at 63. They trade up one spot with the Niners to get this. And also, Matt, we got to talk about the trade they did in the first round, because when the Buffalo Bills were on the clock and I got the notification on my phone from, I can't remember if it was like Ian Rappaport or Jordan Schultz or Adam, they all run together at that point, you know. I saw the notification pop up, Bills trade with Chiefs. I was like, that can't be real. That can't be real. And then you see the compensation, you're like, what?
Yeah.
They didn't give any, like, the Chiefs didn't give anything up. They gave up a few draft spots, but that was it. And that was kind of mind blowing to me.
I don't know what the hell the Bills are doing. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I was on Buffalo radio yesterday talking about this. I assume they wanted me on radio in Buffalo because I gave them a C- in my grades over at Sports Illustrated. We didn't talk about that. We just talked about the sheer terror, which is, I believe, the exact words the host used about that trade. That's like when the Pats and the Colts were at the top of the league 15 years ago. That's like if the Colts had traded out of a pick so that Tom Brady and Bill Belichick could take whoever the hell they wanted. And like, look, I don't care. The Bills will, have and will say, well, Worthy wasn't going to be the pick there. Okay, cool. Fine. And I know Brandon Bean has said, he went on McAfee's show and said, we didn't know who they were going to take, and we're not worried about that. It's about what we're doing. You know what? I got to tell you, man, you ought to be worried about it. Like, you ought to be really, 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 really fucking worried about it based on the way 3 of your last 4 seasons have ended. Because in each playoff game that the Chiefs and Bills have played against each other, there have been 2 common themes. 1, the Bills go home after each one of them. And 2, they go home because they cannot stop the offense. That has been why. They have done nothing to stop Mahomes in these games. 38 points in the AFC title game in 2020. The 13 seconds game, the Chiefs scored 42 points. And then last year, the Chiefs averaged 9 yards per play and scored 27 points and fumbled at the 1-foot line, or they would have had 34 points before kneeling down at midfield. Okay? To trade with that team and say, hey, listen, you really want somebody? Great, here you go. Like, the idea that, well, they were just going to get the guy at 32 anyway. You don't know that. The Niners took a receiver at 31. What if Xavier Worthy was still there? By the way, and I don't know this, I would bet it was going to be Xavier Worthy with San Francisco. He fits them perfectly. They love to run motion. They love to try to space guys out. Who better than Xavier Worthy to do that? So that could have happened. If Bean thought the Chiefs were moving up for a tackle, Tyler Guyton was probably the one guy there they could have moved up for. He went the next pick at 29. So, like, the idea that the Chiefs were just going to get the guy anyway and we might as well get some value out of it, it's bonkers. Like, if you're a Bills fan, your absolute worst nightmare is a game in January where Xavier Worthy's just running all over the field. And you're like, oh, my God, we gave this guy to them. I don't get it. This is a team that you traded the pick that they took Mahomes with. The Chiefs jumped you to get McDuffie, and then you got stuck with Kyer Elam. Like, you should have PTSD to the hilt with them. If they call, hang up the phone. I mean, it's just, I don't get it. I don't understand if you're Buffalo. And, like, to your point, if you're going to do that, you better unequivocally win the trade. That better be something like, we won by so much that we were like, all right, fine. We swapped first, and the Chiefs gave us their 2, and we gave up some late round pick. And I don't think the Chiefs ever would have done that, but that's kind of the point. Like, you make the Chiefs pay such a price there that it's like, all right, fine, we had to do it and we can defend it. You swap 30 picks worth in the middle of the draft.
Yeah.
Who cares? Like, what does it even matter? The Chiefs ended up taking a guy with your pick that they could have gotten in the second round. Yeah. Like, that was, other than the Penix selection by Atlanta, that was, in my opinion, the dumbest thing that happened the entire draft.
I was floored. So I've kind of been in the camp of like, who would want to trade with the Chiefs, right? Like why would you? Like, why would you even want to trade with the Chiefs, especially if you're that far down in the draft? You probably got beat by the Chiefs if you're that far down in the draft, right? And so it was the same thought process I had for Orlando Brown Jr. because I thought there is no way that the Baltimore Ravens are going to give the Chiefs the one player at a position of need. Like, they're not going to give them an answer there, right? Like, they're not going to do that. And they did. So, I mean, it's one of those things where I'm continually flabbergasted by teams willing to trade with the Chiefs. And you're right. The pick swap part of it is almost the worst part, where the Chiefs didn't even give up. The Chiefs had the same amount of picks. And, like, they don't care if it's, like, 10 slots later in the fourth round. Like, what is that? Like, what is that? That is I don't understand that at all. Like, I don't understand why they didn't try to take pick surplus at that point too. I don't get it.
The Bills then also like two-stepped their way completely out of the first round by trading back again. And I know they got better value with that. Although, like, look, everybody loves to look at the chart and go, they got great value. Yeah, but guess what? It's not in that chart? A fifth-year option, which didn't exist when Jimmy Johnson made the chart. So you also have to factor that in. And then the Bills drafted Keon Coleman out of FSU, who, listen, maybe Keon Coleman ends up being a great player. But the big knock on Coleman, the huge, overwhelming knock, is he can't separate because he runs a 4.6 40. And if I have to have one more Bills fan say to me, did you know that Jerry Rice ran over a 4.6 40? Bro, it was 1985. It was 1985. Yes, I am aware of it. Also, Jerry Rice may be the greatest route runner of all time. Like, you look at those guys who ran over a 4.6 in the last 30, 40 years, they're great route runners if they became great players. Yeah. Larry Fitzgerald, Cooper Kupp, like guys who were technicians at the position. Keon Coleman at this point in time is not that. And I want to give Sam Monson over PFF credit. Like, he tweeted out, Keon Coleman, and this is not a typo, is in the 0th percentile separating versus man coverage. 0th. Didn't even know that was a word until this morning. 0th. Okay? So the idea that, like, it's fine. He runs slower than linebackers at the NFL level. Like, all kidding aside, like, there are linebackers, many of them, who run faster than Keon Coleman. Yep. So, like, you better be an unbelievable route runner if you're going to succeed. And the Bills did all this to draft Coleman. And, like, I get the Chiefs drafted a guy who's $165 soaking wet. Like, I understand that. And maybe that ends up being the thing that just totally hinders him. But Brett Beach talked about the fact they want to get him up to 175, 180. And I've already seen people like, well, if they do that, he's going to slow down to what, a 4.26? Who cares?
Yeah.
So if you're the Chiefs, I just have faith based on their infrastructure and their history that they're going to figure out how to use this kid to the best of their abilities. And if I'm a Bills fan, I'm sitting there going, we drafted a guy who's a linebacker at the 33rd pick. We didn't get a fifth-year option. Even if he's good, we only got him for 4 years. Yeah, it was a very bizarre situation.
And I think a lot of people, when it comes to Keon Coleman, kind of split on Keon Coleman. I wasn't huge on Keon Coleman. I didn't love his route running. That was kind of a big thing. When I watched a couple of the games, his route running didn't stick out to me. And that wasn't very. And I know a lot of people talk about like, oh, he's got great hands, and when you talk about Xavier Worthy, like, well, he drops a lot of balls. Well, if you look at the drop rates, Keon Coleman has 7.2% drop rate. Xavier Worthy had 5.4. So, like, and Xavier Worthy played with a broken hand. So, I mean,
there's most of the drops happened was that year.
100%.
Where his drop rate was like 10% because he had a shattered hand, and then like otherwise,
he did not miss a game either. That is such. Sorry, Matt. I'm gonna get off on a tangent on this because I think it is such a lazy take from people who see that he is 165 pounds and think he's not gonna be. He can't do it. He can't play at the NFL level because he's 165 pounds. I get it's kind of light, but like it's not like he didn't miss a game in college. He was routing up DBs in the Big 12 as an 18-year-old. He was hurt. He broke his hand, as we mentioned, played through that, did not miss a single game. So people acting like him being light, injury prone is, I think it's made up, him being injury prone. He is light, that is true, but he's not heavier than McCole Hardman. Like, McCole Hardman played pretty similar to that weight. So it's not like it's an impossible thing to do to play at the NFL level at that weight. They do want to get him up to weight, obviously, as you mentioned. They want to get him up to that 175, probably gain 10 pounds. I think they can do it pretty easily. And they don't play in college against 140-pound players every week, too. Right. So, like, that's another thing. It's like, you don't automatically get ginormous when you come to the NFL. Like, there's NFL players playing in the Big 12 on Big 12 defenses. I just think that's just an incredibly lazy take to just see a guy who weighs 165 pounds and be like, oh, he can't make it because he's 165 pounds.
Also, and look, so to build off of that, and I agree with everything you said. So Keon Coleman in college, I'm just going to pulse it to make sure I've got all the stats exactly right. So Keon Coleman's best year in college was not last year, it was the year prior when he was still at Michigan State. And in 12 games, he had 58 catches, most he ever had, 798 yards for 13.8 yards per reception, all collegiate highs. He had 7 touchdowns that year. He did have 11 last year, so you want to factor that in. That's fine. Yep. But I would argue his best numbers were in 2022. Okay, now I'm going to read you Xavier Worthy's numbers. The worst numbers he ever had in each category. 60 receptions, which is better than anything Keon Coleman ever did. Mm-hmm. 760 yards, which is 38 yards worse than the best year Keon Coleman ever had. Otherwise, he had 981 and 1,014. And he had 12.7 yards per reception, which was 1 yard lower. And that year, the same year, he had 9 touchdowns. Like, this is a kid who played 12 games as a freshman, 13 games as a sophomore, 14 games last year. Like, didn't miss time. And the last part of this that I think needs to just be said, we can move on. But, like, this is the NFL in 2024. This isn't 1994 when I grew up. If this was 1994, I'd rather have Keon Coleman because he's huge. Okay, and going across the field, the middle of the field, when I was a kid, it was a short trip to the hospital. All right, now you can't touch these guys. I mean, everything's predicated on separation and speed and yak and all that, right? I mean, that's what the game is now. Would I rather have Xavier Worthy now or a guy who's a linebacker in size and speed playing receiver? I'd rather have Xavier Worthy. And that's not a Chiefs take. That's real. I mean, go look at Devonta Smith. Go look at Tank Dell. Tank Dell, I watched him in the Senior Bowl last year. What is Tank Dell listed at? I mean, whatever it is, it's too high, okay? Tank Dell, quick search shows, he is 5'10" and a $165, okay? And I got to tell you, I don't even think he's that. I saw that kid in person. Like, that kid was the same size I was when I was in 7th grade. Okay, he was pretty damn good last year. Yeah, before he got hurt. Like, and it wasn't like some little guy thing that he got hurt. He broke his leg. I mean, it was just a random thing.
Well, yeah, they had him run blocking. Yeah, inside the box.
That doesn't help. Right. Like, Xavier Worthy, like in 2024, yeah, I'll take his skill set all day long over a guy who's and look, maybe Keon Coleman is great. Maybe it proves that he's great. But I would bet on the kid who's got unbelievable speed and 3 years of production at a Big 12 school and say, I feel pretty good about the fact that with his size, okay, you got to figure out a few things, but he's got great speed. He's produced year in and year out at a big school in Texas. And he's got Andy Reid. Yeah. Like, not to mention the quarterback. So yeah, I feel like he'll probably be okay. I feel like it's probably a good bet that he'll figure it out.
Yeah. Just a wild move altogether. Xavier Worthy was one of the names that I had that I would be ecstatic if the Chiefs walked away with from day one with Xavier Worthy going into him. The KC Lab guys mocked Xavier Worthy pre-combine to the Chiefs at pick number 32. Yeah. So we've been on KCSN. We've been on the Xavier Worthy trail, I should say, for quite some time now. But Matt, let's take a break. We've got some teams to dunk on. And look, our Broncos dunking on segment last week received high marks. I've heard from a lot of people that really appreciated our Broncos dunking segment, and good news for them, we're going to have more got to also talk about the Falcons as well. We'll take a break and come back right after this.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
Matt, did you happen to see Patrick Mahomes out at Monday Night Raw on Monday?
I saw clips of it. Clips of it. Yeah, he traced him at the Creed Humphrey.
Oh, yeah. Man, the fact that, and I'm a WWE fan, right? I appreciate the art and the sport of professional wrestling and sports entertainment. So the fact that he was helping out Logan Paul's already kind of like a heel, right? And I know that Logan Paul pays him a good amount of money to be a prime athlete, obviously. But I think it kind of is fitting for the Chiefs to be the heels, right? Because it feels like they're fully embracing the heel part of it. Even in the WWE, we're going to help out the guy that you guys don't like. And the Super Bowl ring bit was funny. It was good. I think it was well done. People thought it was weird that they had Mahomes be a heel in Kansas City. Like, you should fly him out to Buffalo and have him be a heel. He'd get a better response there. Like, maybe that's true.
All the time.
But yeah, I thought that was funny.
Something different.
Yeah, we gotta switch it up. People still love Patrick no matter what he does in Kansas City. So let's talk about, okay, who do you want to talk about first? Do you want to talk about not the Eagles, which we could talk about the Eagles because I think Howie Roseman does a really good job of appeasing media, but
we've heard this from another Kansas City personality, right?
It's true. Nick Ray wouldn't
let him have it. I actually think Howie Roseman does a hell of a job, so Nick and I divest there. But yeah, I normally am with Nick.
Do you want to talk about the Broncos or the Falcons first?
Let's whet the appetite. Let's talk about the Falcons, which was just the most egregious draft pick I've seen in maybe my entire life.
So we were maybe good, maybe not good. We're live for every single pick of the NFL draft, right, at KC Sports Network. So you get our unfiltered reactions basically as soon as something happened. And I still don't know if anyone's actually justified this pick for the Falcons. Like, it doesn't make any sense. You just paid Kirk Cousins, an old guy coming off of an Achilles injury, $180 million. And then you trade up to number 8 to select a quarterback who is probably not worth the number 8 overall pick. Yeah. It's a really huge head scratcher. I don't know if anyone understands it. I think I saw something when I was looking on NFL.com about, like, they're saying, we're set at quarterback for the next 5 years. Just like, that's not good process.
There's so much to say about this pick that I don't even know where to start. On our draft grades, I teamed up with Connor Orr, my colleague, and I took the AFC and he took the NFC, and he actually defended the pick. And I think at this point we need to sit down and have some kind of a seance with Connor, who is one of my favorite people, but I can't defend who he is based on that grade. Look, when that pick happened, there are very few times in my life, especially since I started covering this professionally, where I was just floored. Genuinely oh my God, what just happened? That's one of them. The last time I think I was that floored is years ago. It would have been 2018. The Saints traded way up with the Packers and went on the clock. And I was doing a live draft show with Mark Carman on Fansided. And the KCSN guys, I was just sitting there without any clue what was going to happen. And I was saying on the show, I'm like, this has got to be a Lamar Jackson. It has to be. Drew Brees is 100 years old, and the Saints just moved way up. They just gave up next year's first rounder. This is no question. And Goodell strides up to the podium and says, Marcus Davenport. And I just lost my mind. I ripped the Saints for 20 solid minutes on live air. Which I proved out that I was correct in that instance. Could have been wrong, but wasn't. In this case, look, here, so let's go here. As you point out, Cousins, 4 years, $180 million. They have essentially neutered Kirk Cousins, and he hasn't even played it down yet.
Yes.
Okay? Kirk Cousins now knows he's not playing all 4 years of that contract. Even if he's good, he's at the absolute most playing 3, very likely playing 2, and then they swallow a whole bunch of dead cap, in the third year. You're going to have teammates now, if Penix looks good in practice, who are sitting there going, What about that guy? What about him? He looks pretty good. You might have a couple coaches thinking that. What happens if Cousins misses 2 games with a sprained ankle and Penix plays well? Then what do you do? What are you going to do? So you're a $180 million quarterback down on the bench? I mean, how do you go about any of this? You're the Falcons. You're picking 8th for a reason. You got a million needs. And they're like, no, that's all right. We're going to, and then here's the other part of this. You took a 24-year-old quarterback who's not going to play in all likelihood for the next 2 to 3 years. The guy is going to be ready to go for an AARP card by the time he plays. He's got 2 torn ACLs in his background. I don't think anybody felt, apparently except for Atlanta, that he was worthy of a top 10 pick in this draft. So now you're sitting here and you're like, okay, the Cousins part of this is bonkers.
Yes.
Bonkers. Then you get into all the rest of it. Like the Penix is older, that he was overdrafted. And then after the draft, I don't know if you saw this quote, I'm paraphrasing. Terry Fontenot, their general manager, is like, we really would have liked to have had a corner, but we didn't want to, reach or be too aggressive. Bro, you took a backup quarterback at 8. What are you talking about? What world do you live in? I floored. Floored is the nicest way of saying it. If you're Cousins, you're pissed. If you're a lot of players on that team, you're pissed. If you're some of the coaches on that team, you're pissed. If you're the fans, you're pissed. If Arthur Blank is honest, he's pissed. That was a ridiculous decision. And I actually like Michael Penix, by the way. I think he could be a good player.
Yeah.
It's not about Penix. If I'm Penix, I'm pissed. I'm 20 years old, man. I want to play now. I don't want to play in 3 years from now. And the last thing I'll say, why do you draft a quarterback other than the fact that you need one? Why do you draft him in the first round? Cheap contract.
Yes.
4 to 5 years, cheap contract. Who the hell cares that he's got a cheap contract? You're paying Kirk Cousins $45 million a year. So you just lost all the value of it. It's one of the dumbest picks I've ever seen.
Hey, but they get that 5th-year option.
Oh, thank God. They're going to need it. Might be the only time he plays. I mean, it's incredible.
You made a good point. I do feel bad for Michael Penix, and because I think Michael Penix is getting a lot of the brunt of this. And to be fair, he's the prospect himself is not phenomenal, right? He's not a top 10 quarterback,
right? He's a little bit of a wild card.
He is, and he throws left-handed, right? I know that's sometimes scouts make a big deal about that. He's a left-handed quarterback. The ball spins a little bit different than what it does from a right-handed quarterback. He does have the injury background, as you mentioned. He's basically been around since the Reagan administration in college. And the only time that we really saw him come out and play and have a really good year was last year when he had a pretty damn good offense. He had 2 tackles drafted in the first round. He had 3 wide receivers that were top 100 picks. So they had that offense last year was insane. And you look at Michael Penix highlights, you're basically watching Rome Odunze highlights is what it comes down to. So look, I don't want to knock him for that. I don't want to knock him for having good players on his football team, but there's some things there where the taking a quarterback there is one thing, right? Okay, that's awful. Especially you mentioned the corner thing. Terrion Arnold was still on the board. Guido Mitchell was still on the board.
Every corner in the draft was on the board.
I mean, it's
every one of them. They could have traded back.
Yeah. I mean, the Colts were really the team that was expected to take the first corner. That was the team, and they were at 15? Yeah.
Yeah. And then Jacksonville. I love that Jacksonville, by the way, is not on this roast list here, but I don't mind. It's an all-you-can-eat character assassination at this point. Yes. Jacksonville. Hey, guys, how many more receivers are you going to bring in? You're going to play 9 of them at a time here? How many fucking receivers do you need? I mean, I like Brian Thomas Jr. It's not a knock on the kid, but you got Christian Kirk, you're paying a fortune to. You just signed Gabe Davis, which is questionable at best. You now have Brian Thomas Jr. Then they cut Zay Jones, which okay, fine, Zay Jones isn't great, but Zay Jones also is decent enough.
Yeah. You
have ETN, who catches the ball out of the backfield. You have Evan Ingram, who you just paid a fortune to. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to start. You're going to play the rarely seen, 0 personnel and just 5 wide every single time. What are we doing? And then they could have taken the corner. They basically have you and me at corner.
Yep.
And they're like, no, we're all right. I just don't get it, man.
I don't understand them. I don't understand the Falcons. Like sometimes I think these teams are way smarter than I am. And like, how could I ever question any of these teams or any of these GMs because they're so much smarter than me? And then the Falcons do something, and then the Broncos do something, and I'm like, okay, maybe they're not smarter than me. Like maybe that's not the case. Case in Jacksonville too. It's just like they've had some weird drafts in the past. Like, what are they doing?
I had an editor of mine. I won't say who he was, but he's very well known. A long time ago, I was in the middle of writing a column, and it was like a reaction to Sunday column prior to my days in Sports Illustrated. And I made an observation about something, and I was like, I don't know. I feel like that's like I'm being really, really ultra critical of the coach. I'm like, maybe I just don't know as like much about this guy or much about football as this guy does. Like that's probably pretty obvious. So I shouldn't do that. I should go another route. And my editor at the time was like, if you think it and you have factual evidence to back it up, you should write it, because a lot of these guys are glorified PE teachers. And I was like, I don't know, man. He's like, no, believe me. I've been around them. They're like, most of these guys are glorified PE teachers. They start out as some low-level coach because they played college ball, and then like they end up being, a quarterback's coach from Mahomes because like what the heck, he just lucked into it. And then it's like, well, that guy must be a genius. It's like the old, for people out there who know who Steve Weiss is, he was Steve Weiss, a buddy of mine, covers the NFL Network. Sam Weiss, Bengals coach in the 80s, who went to a Super Bowl. And he was the Niners quarterbacks coach in the early 80s when Joe Montana was coming up. And there's this video of him that he just says, like, I became a genius. I took 2 big steps back and folded my arms and watched him throw the football. That's how you become a good coach. It's like, yeah, yep. So, yeah, dude, some of these guys, they just move up because they're attached to the right people. They're in the right situation. Adam Gase says hello. Like, it's just, that's it.
Fair.
That's it.
Before we get out of here, we have to dunk on the Broncos because the Broncos draft was, we kind of anticipated, I think, them to draft Bo Nix, but then like when they actually did, it was a whole other thing, right? Because I think even last week we had joked about Bo Nix being like 6 months younger than Zach Wilson, which also is wild. Both guys have had a lot of adversity. I mean, Zach Wilson was on a bad Jets team. Bo Nix had to be on Auburn. So, I mean, both of those things are very, very... Looking at their quarterback room right now, Matt, Bo Nix is listed as their starter on our lads right now as we sit here.
I bet he is.
Yeah, because Zach Wilson is the backup, traded for the Jets for him.
Yeah.
Undrafted free agent they got from Las Vegas. Last year he played a few games for him. Jared Stidham and Ben DiNucci is the other.
DiNucci. I'll never trash him. He's Italian.
That's true. And he's got a
not many of us
name.
out there.
He's got a sick name. He went on that Linsanity run with the Cowboys too, and that I don't know if will ever be rivaled. But looking at their draft too, I mean, they got Audric Estime in the 5th round, Troy Franklin in the 4th round. He fell. He plummeted.
He's probably like, at least in terms of like what people expected, their best value, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was expecting big second rounder, maybe early 3rd.
Yes, I mean there were some times they were talking about he was talking about a 32 for the Chiefs. Like they were
right. That was aggressive.
I agree. But like they got Chris Abrams restrained, so like they ended up getting like a good chunk. Like they got a lot of guys, but like I don't think any of them really helped their team for this year.
Let's be real about this, okay? I have no idea if Bo Nix is going to succeed or not. Nobody does.
Yep.
Drafting him at 12 is aggressive. I would posit to say that if the Broncos had a 2nd round pick, they would not have taken him at 12. And I know my colleague over at SI, Albert Breer, wrote a great piece that I genuinely, people should check out. Like working with Albert Breer is watching somebody who knows everybody at everything. It's unbelievable. I walked down the street with him at the combine. He said I had like 15 people in the league, none of which I knew even know who they were. Like, we go, yeah, strength and conditioning assistant coach with the Panthers. Like, how the hell do you know that person? Like, what? I mean, yeah. So Albert, his stuff is gold. You learn something every week. And he wrote about a couple of the different situations in the draft. In fact, he also wrote about the Chiefs. But he wrote about Bo Nix going to the Broncos and how during their pre-draft meeting, Bo Nix had a backpack with him. And Sean Payton was like, "Oh, you see what's in your backpack?" It was like all football-related stuff. And Sean Payton, being the football guy that he is like, "Oh, my God, take him number 1 overall." So, huge value at 12. Here's the problem with Bo Nix, like the real honest-to-God problem with this. Also 24 years old, played at Auburn for 3 years. I don't watch a ton of college football. I don't. Like, I don't have the time to do it. But I will tell you, if I watch college, it's usually the SEC. Like, I will watch a lot of that SEC on CBS, right? I always try to catch those games. I saw Bo Nix a decent amount in college. He was awful at Auburn. And I don't mean awful like compared to like what he is now. I mean just generally awful. He completed less than 60% of his passes. He couldn't play. And then he goes to Oregon, and I've seen a lot of people like, man, but yeah, he completed 77% of his throws. I'm going to go on a ledge here. Maybe a hot take. That's a red flag to me. Like, if you're completing 77% of your throws, it's because none of them are hard.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody in the history of football is completing 77% of their throws and throwing the ball down the field, ever. Like, everyone's like, he's got 45 touchdown passes. You're like, yeah, because everything is just this like prepackaged, get it out of your hands, get it to a guy like a Franklin who's now joining him in Denver. I just look at Nix and say, I don't know that he was a first round pick. Like, I saw him at the Senior Bowl. He was rough, like bad. Look, maybe Denver works out for him, but I worry about it's not a good situation. You have a bad line, and you have very little talent around you. You have no grace at all going in there. Like, who are they going to start over you? And if they start one of those guys over you, yikes. Like, it's just a bad, and like, it's just, you look at Denver and you're like, man, that might be the worst roster in the league.
Yeah.
And Bo Nix is going to save it? It feels like the kind of thing that if they get this wrong, like it's a house cleaning in 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. I was just looking up some stats about Bo Nix. His average depth of target was 7 at his time at Oregon. 7 yards was his average depth of target, which is 193rd among D1 qualifying quarterbacks, which would be
out of how many? 192?
193. Yeah, he's last in that category. It's like over 65% of Bo Nix attempts in the past 2 years were less than 9 yards. So
what are we doing? Like, and this is, by the way, if you don't watch a lot of college football, there aren't a whole lot of college teams out there playing press man. Like,
no.
Okay. So like anything in that yard range is pretty much like if you hit the guy in the numbers, it's a completion. Like, it's pitch and catch.
Yeah.
This is, like, I'll say one thing about Michael Penix. He threw the ball down the field. I mean, if you watched Washington, that ball was going down the field.
No, yeah.
I just think of Bo Nix. I feel like Bo Nix is Kenny Pickett. I feel like that's basically who he is. Because if you look at Kenny Pickett's numbers, okay, if you do the quick math here, so Kenny Pickett went to Pittsburgh, and coming out of school was a guy that, like, a lot of people were torn on. He went to the Senior Bowl. He also was not good at the Senior Bowl. He played at Pitt for 5 years. Okay, he was a 4-year starter. Of those years, he was atrocious for 4 of the years, or he wasn't a starter. So the first year, whatever, he played 4 games, barely to the ball. 2018, 2019, 2020. His touchdowns to INTs were 12-6, 13-9, 13-9. No depth of target, like completing barely 60% of his throws. Then his last year, when he was like 37 years old at the University of Pittsburgh, he magically threw for 4,300 yards and 42 touchdowns. And people were like, oh, Kenny Pickett's figured it out.
Yeah.
And then he went to the NFL. And it turned out he hadn't figured it out. He had just stayed at college long enough that he could rent a car legally. Yeah, like, that's the problem. And if you're wondering, like, well, am I going over the top on Bo Nix? Like, no, seriously, as Tucker pointed out, there are, like, serious holes here. He played at Auburn as a starter for 3 years. 57.6 completion percentage, 2,542 yards, 16 touchdowns, 6 picks. Following year, 59.9 completion rate, 24-15 in yardage, 12 touchdowns, 7 picks, 61 completion percentage, 61 rate completion percentage, 22.94 in yards. We decreased every year. 11 touchdown passes, it decreased every year. 3 picks. I mean, like, what are we talking about? And then, yes, you went to Oregon where it was like, hey, man, can you throw a tunnel screen? Because if you can, you're great. Touchdown. I have serious doubts.
Again, an Oregon team that he was surrounded with very good players. Both Washington and Oregon, both those teams were loaded. They had a lot of players drafted on both sides of the ball. Both Oregon and Washington did. Yeah. So it is very hard to like judge these quarterbacks. Bo Nix is 24 years old. February of 25th of 2000 was when he was born. So like he was in college, I think, pre-pandemic too. So it's like he's been around for a minute. Same thing with Michael Penix.
Been around for a couple hours. Man's been around since 7 a.m. this morning. Come on. That's the thing. Like, sometimes this isn't that hard. It really isn't. And like maybe maybe we look like total clowns in years. Like Bo Nix turns out to be like Mahomes' main rival and all that. Although the good news is he'll retire in 3 years because he's 37. Like sometimes it's just not that hard.
Right.
Sometimes it's really not that hard to look at a situation and go, what are we doing here? Like, what are we, like, if you're Denver, bro, take Dallas Turner. Take one of these guys. Say Latu. Take who, like, you suck. Like, what? It's just like, what is at that point, you might as well, like, start Jared Stidham for a year if the alternative is Bo Nix and go 3-14 and take Carson Beck next year or whoever the hell, right? Like, do that. It felt like they just panicked and they were like, we have to take somebody because we looked at our depth chart this morning and we were violently throwing up. So we need a quarterback. And I don't care if Bo Nix is old enough to be Sean Payton's grandfather. Like, we're taking him. And that's that. And here we are.
I mean, look, the quarterback class next year is not very good. Like,
No, it is not.
It's like Carson Beck, as you mentioned. Shedeur Sanders was talked about being the number 1 overall pick, which... Me either. I mean, there's just not a ton of quarterbacks out there in next year's draft. And like this year's quarterback class was a good quarterback class, kind of an older quarterback class too. We're starting to get the phase out of like all of the COVID year guys, right? So that's starting to be phased out. I think this was kind of like the last big year of COVID guys. We're going to start seeing less and less because that COVID year is getting worked out. But I think that also a part of that too. It goes back to Michael Penix, like. Their age is such a big thing. Like, they're both already 24. Like, what are we doing? Putting your franchise's future in a guy who is 4 years younger than Patrick Mahomes.
And also, not for nothing, like, genuinely, you got to factor this all in to, it's the age, but like, think about if you're a high school quarterback, I believe it wasn't our own Ken Swanson. Didn't he play high school quarterback?
He played a little bit of an NAIA quarterback too.
Yeah. Oh, look at that, man! He could have gone pro if it wasn't for his knee. Yeah. As is the case with a million Americans around the country right now, going, if my knee had held up, I would have been Earl Campbell. But like, if you play quarterback or anything, and you're in high school and you have talent, like you're real talent, okay, like you're not like some bench warmer. You play for 6 years. Like you better be pretty damn good by the time you're playing against kids who are 6 years younger than you.
Yes.
Like, I'd hope you're pretty good, right? I mean, it's just like it's crazy, man. To me, it's crazy. You have to factor that all
in. You really do. And then I think that's going to do it for our drafts episode. I hope people enjoyed our just second half of the show where we just dunk on other teams. Maybe we should keep that a weekly segment where we just go.
Believe me.
And just absolutely just dunk on a franchise.
Sure I am. And now you can watch it on YouTube. So
yes.
It's great. We're on YouTube. We're live and in color, for better or worse.
Yes, I forgot to mention at the top. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you. We appreciate it. We heard the noise. We heard you asking for it on YouTube.
Obscenities.
I mean, yes, you also heard the obscenities. Yes, all of that. We're here now. We're on YouTube. We'll be here again next week for another episode of That Football Show. Matt, thank you for joining me again today. And thank you to Ben Holiday, Bottled and Bond, and Bourbon, and Holiday Distillery, our friends out there. Spent a lot of time out there this past week. But that's going to do it for That Football Show. We'll talk to you again next week.